Hi, I'm Stefon Harris, and welcome to VicFirth.com. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about my new redesigned Vic Firth Signature Series mallet. One of the things that's most important to me in designing a mallet is, first and foremost, is to consider sound. I think it's really important not to let our instruments dictate our tone. So for me, I'm always concerned with having an instrument that speaks like the human voice. So tone is absolutely critical, and in that process of looking for a sound that is more resonant and broad, we have to consider a lot of factors. The primary factor that we talked a lot about was the size of the mallet head. In terms of playing with a jazz combo, many times you're dealing with the drum set and it's pretty powerful. You really need a mallet that will ensure that you have enough projection over the sound of the ensemble. So many times when we have small-headed mallets, I find that playing chords, the chords tend to sound very percussive. So that's not a good sound for me in the context of comping behind a vocalist or a saxophone. People generally want a really warm and lush sound from the vibraphone. So we were able to accomplish that with this mallet. Large head, lightweight, beautiful projection, warm lyrical tone. One way in which my playing has dramatically changed as a result of the redesign of this mallet is that I've played with 4 mallets a lot more often now. The weight is such that I'm still able to get a nice full sound, yet the mallet is light enough. I find that in the past, in order to really get around comfortably with 4 mallets, I tended to side with a lighter mallet just for playability, but then I lost a lot of the fundamentals. So with these mallets, we really struck the perfect balance. So now playing with 4 mallets, I still have a nice full sound. At first glance, someone may see this mallet and think that it's very heavy. It's actually not very heavy. The large mallet head makes it appear that way, but the weight of it is quite light and it's very, very playable. You'll notice that even when I'm doing exercises with one hand, that it doesn't take a lot of effort. And by the way, I'm under 150 pounds. I'm not a very big guy, so I don't think it takes a lot of strength to be able to do this. Not a problem at all. Something you should definitely try. In fact, I actually think the large mallet head is kind of sexy. course, as a performer, you really want to be able to have as wide a range of emotional expression as possible. and that has a great deal to do with dynamic range. This mallet is really, really good in terms of playing softly. You hear really a big, full, fundamental tone as you listen here. And as I get softer, you'll notice the fundamental remains just as strongly. So if I'm playing a line that needs to dissipate, it's really important that you don't hear the fuzz of the mallet or the sweetness of the sound disappearing and you're left with a percussive sound. With this mallet, you don't get this. Watch, I'll start really full here, and as I progress up the instrument, I'll get softer, but notice the character of the fundamental remains. So dynamically, in terms of a warm, full sound, that's really, really important. Now, there are, of course, moments in music where things get extremely intense and you need to cut through. This mallet has the unique ability in that it is a two-tone mallet. When I play very softly, you hear a nice, full sound, but when I kick in and squeeze a little bit harder from the fingers, you'll notice that it does cut through the core of the yarn, and the core of the mallet is actually going to come through a little bit more like this. So you hear there's a little bit more of a punch to it when I squeeze with the fingers here. And actually, even at a softer dynamic, if I want to have that effect, I just squeeze a little bit more with the fingers. See, I get this. Still a little bit more punch from the middle because I'm pulling from the fingers here. Or at that same dynamic, if I'm using a little bit more wrist and not pulling from the finger, I can get a warmer tone, the same dynamic. Right? Two totally different effects from the same mallet with just a simple change in the technique. I use a little bit more finger for the punch, a little bit more wrist for a warm tone. So I find that in the performance situation, I'm able to cover everything that I need. I don't need to change mallets in the middle of a phrase. If I want to have a note to pop out, I can do that. Wide range of expression. You'll notice that I choose to play with mallets that are wrapped in yarn as opposed to cord for the vibraphone and the marimba. For me, yarn tends to have a much more warm sound, and ultimately that is the sound that I'm going for. I'm looking for a lush, warm sound that has a lot of projection. Yarn does that for me in a way that cord mallets don't. They tend to be a little bit more percussive, which is a good thing in certain circumstances, but I think in terms of musical phrasing and lyricism, I need a little bit more of a warm tone. This particular yarn is a synthetic and it's highly durable, and I play these things non-stop and I have no problem with them at all. They last a very, very long time. So a lot of the problems that you may run into with yarn mallets in terms of the wear and tear, this particular synthetic yarn is incredibly strong and durable, and I haven't had any trouble at all with it. Another really important thing for me in designing a mallet is that it needed to be able to be played on the marimba and the vibraphone. The way that I tend to use a marimba may be slightly different than many people use it traditionally. The primary use of the marimba for me on stage is to blend the two instruments together. Many times you'll notice that I'm playing them at the same time. So I'm not in a situation where I can have two different sets of mallets. It's really important to have one mallet that sounds great on both instruments. I find that with this mallet, because it is two-tone, if I'm playing a melody in this hand, I'm able to give a little bit more push, play softer here, and create a warmer palette so that they're blending with each other like this. Now for those players who just play marimba, these mallets also sound incredible. Listen to this tone. Entire range of the instrument also. To reach for that one up there. Let's talk a little bit about the shaft of the mallet. The shaft of the mallet is a very significant part of the feel of a mallet. Balance is really, really critical. If you have a mallet that is too light and a shaft that is too long or too short, you'll feel like you're just moving your hand without the weight of a mallet, which is not necessarily a good feeling. This shaft is rattan. I've gone with rattan because I find birch to be a little stiff for the vibraphone. Rattan has a little bit of bend to it, but you'll notice that these are a little bit thicker than many of the traditional rattan mallets. And we've gone with them a little bit thicker so that it doesn't quite flop as much. It gives me just enough give, so when I'm using dampening techniques on the vibes, I need just a little bit of flex to it. And something I do even more often is using grace notes. So I'm doing so I need just enough give so that it feels good with the weight. The length of this shaft is about 14 1/4, so it's a little bit longer than what I had before, yet just a pinch shorter than a lot of traditional vibraphone mallets. I find that a lot of times people have a lot of extra mallet here, and having this extra mallet here is additional weight. So I tend to play a little bit further back on the mallet, and therefore I can use a mallet that's just a little bit shorter and therefore a little bit lighter. One of the techniques that I use when I'm improvising is that I tend to use a lot of double strokes. I find that with these mallets, they're really, really perfectly balanced and they have a really nice bounce to them. In the middle of a line, sometimes I'm throwing in a double stroke. Totally effortless, really feels great. Okay, so as we consider situations like drum corps or concert band, traditionally you run into this issue of projection versus fundamental. Usually we find that you need to have a really hard, brittle tone in order to project the sound. But the issue is, if we're not projecting the fundamental, then we're just projecting a lot of attack, which ultimately doesn't sound so good, although it can be heard. Now, this is a mallet that actually does both. It has incredible projection, but what it is that you're projecting is the fundamental tone of the instrument. And that's something that took a lot of time to develop, and there are a lot of factors that go into making a mallet that's able to do that. One of the primary factors is the fact that this is a synthetic yarn, which again gives you a very warm tone compared to a traditional cord mallet. And also a lot of the mallets that are traditionally used in these settings tend to be small. This is larger. This synthetic yarn is very, very durable, so it solves a lot of the traditional issues that people may have had with yarn mallets in terms of durability. So the design of this mallet takes a very creative approach in addressing a lot of the issues that I just mentioned before in terms of the projection of the fundamental. Again, it has a lot to do with the synthetic yarn, the larger mallet head, but still a very lightweight mallet, and the playability is extremely light. It feels really, really good under your hands. So I think that this is going to be a very, very useful mallet for a lot of people in a variety of settings.